She won't remember why she left, but she'll never forget how you acted after she did. The moment she walks away, something shifts, and not just in your life, but in how she sees you forever. Most men think the breakup itself is the defining moment, but it's not. It's what happens right after that writes the real story in her mind. Because when emotions are high and everything feels uncertain, your reaction becomes the clearest reflection of who you really are. At first, it's instinct. You feel the loss, the confusion, the urge to fix things. You want to reach out, explain, prove, say something that will bring her back or at least make sense of what just happened. And that's normal. But what you choose to do with that feeling is what separates a man who gets remembered from a man who gets forgotten. If you react emotionally, if you chase, beg, over explain, or try to convince her, you might think you're showing how much you care. But from her perspective, it communicates something else. It shows a lack of control. It shows that your emotional state depends entirely on her presence. And while that might come from a genuine place, it doesn't create respect, it creates imbalance. Because in that moment, she's watching, not necessarily consciously, but she's observing how you handle pressure, how you respond to loss, how you carry yourself when things don't go your way. And those observations form a lasting impression, one that stays with her far longer than any conversation you had during the relationship itself. But if you respond differently, if you stay composed, if you don't rush to fill the silence, if you allow space instead of forcing connection, it creates something powerful. It shows that you're grounded, that your identity isn't shaken by a single moment, that you can feel deeply without losing control. And that kind of stability is rare. This doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care in a way that doesn't compromise who you are. You're not reacting from panic, you're responding from clarity. And when a man operates from that place, it changes how he's perceived. He's no longer just someone she left, he becomes someone she has to think about, because now instead of remembering a man who tried to hold on at all costs, she remembers a man who knew when to let go without losing himself. A man who didn't collapse under pressure, didn't lose his composure, didn't beg for something that was already slipping away. And that memory sticks. Not because of what you said, but because of what you showed through your actions, through your restraint, through your ability to stand firm in a moment where most people fall apart, because in the end, it's not the breakup that defines you. It's how you choose to carry yourself after it. Right after she leaves, everything in you wants to say something. You feel the urge to explain, to clear things up, to make sure she understands your side of the story. You replay conversations in your head, thinking about what you could say differently, what message might change her mind, what words might bring her back. It feels like if you just say the right thing, everything can be fixed. But that's where most men go wrong, because in trying to fill the silence, they actually erase the very thing that could have made them unforgettable. They talk too much too soon and too emotionally, and in doing so, they remove the space that creates curiosity, reflection, and impact. Silence isn't about ignoring her or pretending you don't care. It's about understanding that not every moment needs a reaction, especially not a desperate one. When you immediately reach out, trying to reconnect or explain, you're operating from a place of urgency. And urgency often communicates neediness, even when that's not your intention. From her perspective, it confirms something she may have already felt, that you're more invested than she is, that you're willing to chase, that your emotional stability is tied to her decision. And once that dynamic is clear, it becomes difficult to reverse. Because attraction doesn't grow in a space where one person is constantly trying to pull the other back. But when you choose silence instead, something very different happens. You don't rush to explain, you don't try to convince, you allow the moment to exist without interference. And that absence of reaction creates a kind of tension that words never could. Because now she doesn't know what you're thinking, she doesn't know how you're feeling. And that uncertainty becomes something she has to sit with. Instead of you chasing clarity, she begins to look for it. Instead of you trying to be understood, she starts questioning what she might not have understood about you. That shift only happens when you resist the urge to fill every gap with conversation. And here's the deeper truth: people don't remember every word you say, they remember how you made them feel and how you carried yourself in critical moments. Silence, when it comes from strength, leaves a stronger emotional imprint than any speech ever could. It gives her space to reflect, to revisit the connection, to feel your absence in a way that constant communication would never allow. This doesn't mean you're playing games. It means you're choosing not to act from panic. You're choosing to give both of you the space needed to process what just happened. And in that space, something important begins to take shape, not through effort, but through presence, or in this case, the lack of it. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. After she leaves, there's a moment where everything feels uncertain. Your routine changes, your focus shifts, and there's an empty space where something meaningful used to be. In that space, you're faced with a choice. Not a loud, obvious choice, but a quiet, internal one. You can either let the situation break your structure, or you can use it to build something stronger. Most people underestimate how much their behavior during this phase is being observed, not just by others, but by the person who left. Even if she's not in constant contact, she's still aware. She notices what you do, how you carry yourself, how you respond to the situation, and whether you realize it or not, your actions during this time communicate more than anything you ever said during the relationship. If you lose your routine, if you let your discipline slip, if you become inconsistent in how you show up in your own life, it creates a certain image. It suggests that your stability was tied to her presence, that without her, things start to fall apart. And while that might feel like a natural reaction, it doesn't create a lasting impression of strength. But if you handle things differently, if you maintain your structure, stay focused, and continue progressing, it sends a completely different message. It shows that your life has direction beyond the relationship, that your identity isn't dependent on one person, and that kind of consistency builds a quiet form of respect. This is where discipline becomes more than just a personal habit, it becomes a signal, not one that you broadcast, but one that's noticed over time. When you keep working, keep improving, keep showing up for yourself, it demonstrates something deeper than motivation. It shows resilience. It shows that you're capable of navigating loss without losing your foundation. And that's something people remember, not because you told them, but because they saw it. Because while many react emotionally and lose control after a breakup, few remain grounded. Few continue moving forward without trying to pull the past back in. And that difference stands out. There's also a shift that happens internally. When you stay disciplined, you begin to rebuild your sense of control. You're no longer reacting to the situation, you're directing your response to it. You're choosing how you spend your time, where your energy goes, and what your focus is. And that sense of control becomes stabilizing. It doesn't erase the loss, but it changes how you carry it. Instead of being consumed by what happened, you start creating something new. You start building a version of yourself that isn't defined by the relationship, but strengthened by the experience. And whether she notices immediately or later doesn't change the impact. Because what she sees is a man who didn't stop when things got difficult, a man who didn't let one situation determine his entire direction, a man who stayed consistent when it would have been easier to fall apart. Because in the end, it's not just about what you lose, it's about what you build after it. After she leaves, there's an assumption that everything about you will stay the same, except now you'll just be without her. That you'll feel the same, think the same, and move through life with that same emotional attachment still guiding your actions. And in many cases, that's exactly what happens. People stay mentally connected to what's already over, replaying moments, holding on to feelings, waiting for something to change. But when you choose to move forward, genuinely move forward, not just pretend to, you disrupt that entire expectation. Because now you're not the same person she walked away from. You're someone who is actively changing, growing, and building something new. And that shift doesn't go unnoticed, even if it's not acknowledged immediately. At first, she might assume it's temporary, that you're just distracting yourself, trying to cope, or filling the space. But over time, as your actions stay consistent, it becomes clear that this isn't a reaction, it's a transformation. You're not moving on to escape the past, you're moving forward because you've accepted it and chosen a different direction. And that's where her perspective begins to change. Because now, instead of seeing you as someone who was left behind, she starts seeing someone who kept going, someone who didn't pause their life waiting for a return, someone who didn't let the end of one chapter define the rest of the story. This creates a kind of contrast that's hard to ignore. She remembers the version of you she left, how you were, how you showed up, how the relationship felt. But now she's seeing a version of you that's more focused, more grounded, more aligned with yourself. And that comparison can be powerful because it challenges the assumptions she made when she decided to walk away. It's not about proving her wrong or trying to show her what she missed. It's about embodying something different, something stronger. When you continue improving, whether it's your mindset, your habits, your goals, you naturally become someone who stands out from the version she once knew. And here's the important part: you're not doing it for her, you're doing it for yourself. That's what makes it real, that's what makes it sustainable. Because when growth is tied to someone else's attention, it fades when that attention isn't there. But when it comes from your own decision to evolve, it stays. As that growth becomes more visible, it forces a quiet reassessment. Not necessarily one that leads to action, but one that exists in the background. She begins to see that what she walked away from wasn't fixed, it was still developing. And in that realization, there's often a sense of curiosity, sometimes even reflection. But by that point, your focus isn't on how she sees you anymore, it's on how you see yourself. You're no longer trying to fit into a past dynamic, you're building a future that doesn't rely on it. Because when you truly move forward, you don't just change your life, you change the way you're remembered. Most people think that what leaves a lasting impression is what you say, what you promise, or how strongly you try to hold on to someone. But the truth is, what stays with someone long after the relationship ends is how you handled yourself when everything was falling apart. Because that moment reveals something deeper than words, it reveals your emotional control. When a breakup happens, emotions are intense. There's confusion, frustration, sadness, sometimes even anger. And in that state, it's easy to react, to send messages you didn't think through, to say things out of emotion, to try to force a connection that's already slipping away. Most men fall into that pattern not because they're weak, but because they're human. They act on feeling instead of grounding themselves in control. But when you don't do that, when you choose restraint instead of reaction, it creates a very different kind of impression. It shows that you can feel everything without being controlled by it, that you don't need to act on every emotion just because it's there. And that level of control stands out more than any dramatic gesture ever could. Because later, when she reflects, she doesn't just remember the relationship. She remembers how you handled the end of it. She remembers whether you stayed composed or lost control, whether you respected yourself or tried to hold on to something that was already over. And without realizing it, she starts comparing that to every other experience she has. This is where your behavior becomes a standard, not something you declare, but something that's observed. If you remain grounded, if you didn't chase, if you didn't let emotions dictate your actions, that becomes the image she carries forward. And when she meets other men, consciously or not, she measures them against that experience. Most people don't reach that level of control. They react, they escalate, they try to fix things in the moment instead of allowing space. So when someone doesn't do that, when someone shows patience, discipline, and emotional stability, it creates contrast. And contrast is what makes something memorable. It's not about trying to impress her or make her regret her decision. It's about who you become in that moment. Because when you can hold your composure in a situation where most would lose it, you demonstrate something rare. And rare qualities are the ones that leave lasting impressions. Over time, that impression doesn't fade, it becomes more defined. Because she starts to realize that what she experienced wasn't common, that not everyone handles loss with that level of clarity and self control. That realization changes how she views not just you, but her own expectations. But here's the key: you don't do this for her memory, you do it because it aligns with who you are becoming. The fact that it leaves an impression is just a byproduct, because when you master your emotions in the moment, most people lose themselves. You become someone no one forgets. At some point, you realize something that changes everything. You were never meant to chase her back. You were never meant to spend your time trying to recreate something that already ended. Because the moment you shift your focus from getting her back to becoming better without her, your entire mindset evolves. Most men stay stuck in the past. They keep thinking about what they lost, what they could have done differently, what they wish they could say. And that attachment keeps them in a loop, mentally tied to someone who is no longer part of their life. But the man who breaks out of that cycle does something different. He accepts what happened, not as a failure, but as a turning point. And from that point forward, his focus changes. he stops asking, how do I get her back? And starts asking, how do I become someone who doesn't need to? That question alone shifts his energy because now he's no longer trying to fill a void. He's building something within himself that can't be taken away. This is where transformation begins. Not in dramatic changes overnight, but in consistent decisions over time. He works on himself, not for validation, but for growth. He improves his discipline, his mindset, his direction in life. And as he does that, something powerful happens. His sense of identity becomes stronger than any attachment he once had. Now, if she comes back, it doesn't feel like a victory. It feels like an option because he's no longer the same person who is emotionally dependent on her presence. He's someone who has rebuilt his life in a way that stands on its own. And that changes everything about how he engages moving forward. He's not trying to impress, he's not trying to prove anything. He's simply being who he has become. And that authenticity carries a different kind of weight. It's not forced, it's not performative, it's real. And people can feel that. But if she doesn't come back, nothing changes in his direction. He keeps moving forward, he keeps building because his progress was never tied to her return. It was tied to his own commitment to grow. And that's what makes it sustainable. This is the point where he becomes unforgettable. Not because he tried to be, but because he reached a level of self sufficiency that most people never do. He's no longer chasing outcomes, he's focused on becoming the kind of man who creates them. And that's the real win. Not getting her back, not proving her wrong, but becoming someone who stands strong regardless of what anyone else chooses. Because when you stop trying to be remembered and start becoming complete on your own, you become impossible to forget.